Dobro. History. Archive.
All right, so let's set the scene. November 22nd, 1995.
Right.
Something fundamentally shifted in Hollywood that day. And you might remember the excitement, right? But if you look back at when Toy Story premiered, the feeling wasn't just, hey, we saw a hit movie.
No, not at all. It was so much bigger. The sources, when you really dig into them, they all use this very specific language. It was like they'd seen a ghost.
The phrase that comes up again and again is, the future just arrived.
Exactly. And that feeling, that sense of witnessing a real paradigm shift, you can feel it in the reviews from that time. The critics, they weren't just impressed. They were genuinely stunned, dazzled.
Absolutely. They sound like they've seen technology they weren't expecting for another, 10, 20 years?
For sure. And we have to talk about the details they obsessed over, because it wasn't just the big picture. They were pointing out these tiny, almost insignificant things.
Like the reflections on Buzz Lightyear's helmet.
Yeah, that and the texture of the carpet in Andy's room.
Yeah.
But the one that always gets me is the little fingerprints on the doors.
Fingerprints. Just think about that. The illusion of three-dimensional space was so convincing that your brain just accepted it. And of course, the movie becomes the #1 film of the year, a huge cultural moment.
But if you were sitting there and the credits start to roll, one name would have jumped out at you, would have created this huge disconnect.
Executive producer, Steve Jobs.
And for you, listening to this now, that sounds completely normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jobs, innovation, success,
No,
it all fits.
But that is not the world of 1995, and that's really the core of what we're digging into here.
Mm-hmm.
In 1995, he wasn't the icon in the black turtleneck we all remember. He was Steve Jobs, the failure, the ghost, the guy who had been publicly, humiliated, chased out of Apple a decade earlier.
He was, and the financial press called him the most famous failure in Silicon Valley.
So that's the central question, isn't it? What was this disgraced hardware guy doing running the animation studio that just changed the world?
How did that happen?
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to trace that path. How Jobs, who was really driven by revenge and nearly went broke, pivoted from a hardware disaster to this unbelievable creative success.
And then, and this is the key part, how he used that one movie, Toy Story, as the ultimate lever for the ultimate comeback, his return to Apple.
It's a redemption story that happens through the most unlikely backdoor imaginable.
And it all starts in this place of really deep professional shame back in 1985.
Let's start there. So after he gets forced out of Apple, Jobs' motivation isn't really about finding some new passion.
No, not at all.
According to all the sources, it was pure spite. He needed to prove everyone wrong.
He immediately starts NXT to build these super high-end computers. The entire point was to build a machine so powerful, so elegant, that it would make Apple look stupid for letting him go.
Next, he was the revenge machine. But his path to Pixar, which he gets into in 1986, was, like you said, almost a total accident.
He wasn't looking for a movie studio. He was looking for tools.
Exactly. George Lucas, who was going through a very expensive divorce and needed cash, was selling off his little computer graphics division.
And Jobs makes what everyone at the time called a small, strange purchase.
The price was $5 million for the division itself, and then he immediately had to put in another $5 million of his own money just to keep the lights on.
So he's $10 million in the hole from day one.
And the sources are really, really clear about his goal here. He did not buy this company to make animated movies.
Absolutely not. He bought it to build hardware. He wanted to create the Pixar image computer,
which was supposed to be the most powerful graphics computer on the planet. He was still completely obsessed with proving he was a hardware genius.
So that little animation team he inherited, the guys who would go on to make Toy Story.
To him, they were just a marketing gimmick.
Yeah. Their only job was to make cool-looking commercials and short films that would show off how powerful his new computer was.
He was selling the shovels, not digging for the gold himself.
But what's so fascinating is that he accidentally brought another exile into his orbit.
Sure.
A guy who also had a major score to settle.
John Lasseter.
Mm-hmm. He was running that little animation team. And in his own world, the animation world, he was also a pretty high-profile failure.
Yeah, he had been this brilliant young star at Disney. Everyone thought he was the future. And then in 1983, they fired him. Just, boom, you're out.
And his crime, if you want to call it that, was basically seeing the future too clearly, too soon.
It was the movie Tron, wasn't it?
That was it. He saw the light cycle sequence in Tron, and he said it absolutely blew him away. He was, like, radicalized by what computers could do for animation.
So he goes back to his bosses at Disney, all excited with this huge idea.
A revolutionary idea at the time. He pitched using computers to create these rich three-dimensional backgrounds, which would give so much more depth to the traditional 2D hand-drawn animation.
And the movie he wanted to try this on was called The Brave Little Toaster.
But you have to remember what Disney was like in the early 80s. It was creatively stuck, very conservative. They wanted princesses and fairy tales, not computer code.
The pitch was a complete disaster.
And the fallout was immediate. Lasseter said that literally minutes after the meeting ended, he got called into his boss's office and was fired on the spot.
It's just incredible when you think about it. You have these two incredibly driven, brilliant guys. Jobs kicked out of tech for being too radical.
And Lasseter kicked out of animation for being too radical.
And in 1986, they find themselves in the same tiny, struggling company, both of them just burning with this need to prove their old bosses wrong.
But with completely opposite ideas about how to do it. One wants to sell machines, the other wants to tell stories.
And that tension, that's the engine for the next 10 years.
Yeah, and the market was about to deliver a very, very harsh verdict on Steve's hardware obsession.
Okay, so let's unpack this financial black hole that Jobs basically fell into. His grand vision, the Pixar image computer. It wasn't just a failure. The sources call it a spectacular failure.
And to really get why, you have to understand who he was trying to sell it to. It wasn't for regular people. It was a visualization machine for, like, high-end science and medicine.
Right. Think about a hospital wanting to render a 3D model from a SAT scan, or an oil company trying to map seismic data.
That was the niche, a very, very small niche.
And the price tag was the real killer. He wanted the best, most powerful machine, and it cost $135,000.
$135,000 in the late 80s.
Who could afford that? A few big hospitals, maybe NASA, a couple of oil companies, that's it.
The market was just too small, and the machine was too specialized. Even though the technology was amazing, nobody knew how to fit it into their workflow. Sales were just, well, they were basically non-existent.
And this whole time, Jobs isn't using venture capital money. He's funding this thing himself, personally.
The financial drain was just brutal. He burns through $10 million, then 20, then 30.
By the time the dust settled, he had sunk $50 million of his own money into Pixar.
$50 million. And again, in the late 80s, that was a huge fortune. It was pretty much all the liquid cash he had from his Apple days.
The sources are very clear on this. It almost sent Steve Jobs into bankruptcy.
He's facing his second massive public failure. And this one was about to wipe him out completely.
So by the early 1990s, he's just desperate. He has to sell the company.
And this has to be the most humiliating moment for him. He's trying to sell Pixar, not as this visionary company, but as a liability he needs to dump.
He goes to his friend Larry Ellison, the CEO of Oracle. Ellison's interested, but not for the price Jobs wants.
Then he goes to Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft. No dice.
And then the most bizarre one, he offers the entire company to Hallmark cards.
Hallmark. He thought maybe they'd want the animation team to make, like, digital greeting cards.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
But the craziest part is that nobody would buy it. They all looked at it and saw a failing hardware company that was burning cash.
They thought it was worthless.
But while the hardware side of the business is going down in flames,
The little animation department, the one that was just supposed to be a marketing gimmick, was quietly, almost accidentally, succeeding.
this is the lifeline. The whole story hinges on this. Back in 1986, to show off what the computer could do, Lasseter's team makes that short film, Luxo Jr.
The one with the desk lamps.
Right. And that short film, which was really just a glorified tech demo, gets an Academy Award nomination.
Which was a shock to the industry. It was a sign that computer animation could actually have, character and emotion.
But the real turning point was 1988. They made another short film called Tin Toy.
Ah, yes. The one about the little one-man band toy who's being terrorized by this giant drooling baby.
That film wins the 1988 Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film.
And this is a huge deal. It was the very first computer-animated film ever to win an Oscar.
So just imagine you're Steve Jobs at this moment. Your $50 million hardware dream is a smoking crater. But this small team of artists in the back room just won the biggest award in Hollywood. Jobs himself said later, the only bright spot was John's short films. Everything else was not really working.
The Oscar was literally the only valuable asset the company had left. He had set out to build a computer company, and it accidentally created an animation studio.
And that Oscar, that artistic success, is what finally got the attention of the one company John Lasseter probably never wanted to hear from again.
Disney.
That Oscar win put Pixar on the radar of Jeffrey Katzenberg, the head of Disney Animation. And this is where things get really, really interesting.
Because Jobs is desperate. He's out of cash. His financial advisor at the time, Lawrence Levy, described this as a rare weak moment for Steve. He had absolutely no leverage.
And he's going up against Katzenberg, who was famously ruthless in negotiations.
A killer.
And Jobs, the guy who would later become this master negotiator, just got completely bested. He signed what has been called one of the worst deals in Hollywood history.
We really need to break down why it was so bad. It was structured to keep Pixar alive, but only just barely, while Disney got all the benefit.
So, okay, the one good part of the deal. Disney would pay for all the production and marketing costs for Toy Story.
Which, for Jobs, was a lifesaver. It meant he didn't have to declare bankruptcy tomorrow.
But the price he paid for that was just devastating. Let's start with the profits.
This is the heart of the trap. Disney would get somewhere between 87.5% to 90% of all the profit.
90%.
So Pixar, the company that is inventing the technology, writing the story, creating the characters, they get a tiny sliver. At most, 12.5%.
On top of that, Disney owned everything. The film, the characters, Woody, Buzz, they were all Disney's property forever.
Pixar was basically a hired gun. They were creating this incredibly valuable intellectual property, but they had no ownership of it.
And then came the real dagger, the killer clause.
This is the part that was designed to crush them in the long run. Disney got the right to make all the sequels. Toy Story 2, Toy Story 3.
With or without Pixar.
With or without Pixar. They could literally just take the characters, hire another animation studio, and cut Pixar out completely.
It was a trap. Jobs knew he'd been beaten. He needed Toy Story to be a hit just to survive. But even if it was the biggest movie ever, the deal meant his company was still doomed.
And the final numbers are just staggering. Toy Story goes on to make over $361 million worldwide.
A certified blockbuster.
And Pixar's total take from that massive hit, according to their own financial filings at the time, it was not even $19 million.
That's about a 5% cut. You just can't run a company, especially a tech company, that needs huge investment in R&D on a 5% margin.
Jobs knew it was a slow death. And this goes back to his personality, right? He got humiliated at Apple. Now he just got humiliated by Katzenberg.
He knew he had to break that contract. He used to say, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
So now the stakes are impossibly high. They are financially screwed if the movie fails, and they are still financially screwed if it succeeds.
They had to be creatively brilliant and then somehow find a way to tear up that piece of paper.
And the creative part was about to hit its own wall. A big one.
Yeah, the pressure inside Pixar at this point was just insane. They're making their first ever feature film, which is hard enough.
And at the same time, they're inventing the software to actually make it. The modeling tools, the lighting, the rendering, all of it was being built from scratch as they went.
They were building the plane while they were flying it.
And all the while, you have Disney, their financial lifeline, breathing down their necks. Jeffrey Katzenberg kept sending notes.
And his big note was that the film had to be edgy. It had to appeal to adults, not just be some, typical Disney fairy tale.
And the Pixar team, who were terrified of getting shut down, they took those notes to heart. They tried to make it edgy.
And their idea of edgy was to make Woody dark. Really dark.
They mistook edgy for cruel.
It all came to a head on November 19th, 1993. This is the day the whole thing nearly died.
They screened the first half of the movie in storyboard form for the Disney executives.
Lights go up after the screening, and there's just silence.
The sources all describe it as cold, dead silence. The film was a catastrophe. It was deemed unwatchable.
And the single biggest problem, was Woody. He wasn't the character we know. He wasn't flawed and jealous.
No, he was a villain, a sarcastic jerk, an outright bully.
There are some specific examples from that screening that are just shocking. In that version, Woody doesn't accidentally knock Buzz out the window.
He deliberately shoves him, maliciously.
And he's just horrible to the other toys. He calls Mr. Potato Head spuds for brains. He's just relentlessly mean.
Even Tom Hanks, who was voicing the character, was getting worried. He told the team that Woody had been turned into a real jerk.
So after the screening, Katzenberg is furious. He turns to his head of feature animation, a guy named Peter Schneider, and demands to know what went wrong.
And Schneider gives this legendary reply. He says, "It's not their movie anymore. It's completely not the movie that John set out to make."
The hammer came down immediately. Disney ordered production shut down. All work on the movie stopped.
And that day became known inside Pixar as the Black Friday incident.
Lasseter was devastated. He said it felt like he'd been fired all over again. And for Steve Jobs, his $50 million bet, his last hope,
Was suddenly worthless. It was over.
He's now failed at Apple, he's failed at hardware with NXT and Pixar, and now his one creative Hail Mary pass has just been declared dead on arrival.
This is the absolute bottom for him.
And yet, this is the moment that I think really defines him. What he does next is unbelievable.
Any rational person would have just cut their losses, liquidate the company, sell the patents, walk away.
But Jobs didn't. He did this incredible act of faith. During the shutdown, when there was no money coming in from Disney, he paid for everything out of his own pocket.
What little money he had left.
He kept the lights on, he kept the core team employed because he believed in the talent.
He bet it all on John Lasseter and his key creative people. Andrew Stanton, Pete Docter, Joe Ranft.
So that core team, they basically locked themselves in a room for months. And they knew the problem wasn't the animation, it was the story.
Ed Catmull, Pixar's co-founder, said they worked almost every waking minute to rediscover the heart of the movie.
And they found it. They had this huge creative breakthrough. They realized Woody shouldn't be a tyrant. He should be a leader who is motivated by fear.
A very human, very relatable fear. The fear of being replaced, of becoming obsolete.
So they completely rewrote his character arc. The lie he believes at the start of the movie is, I have to be Andy's favorite toy to have any value.
Right, his self-worth is totally external. But the truth, he learns, is my value comes from being there for Andy no matter what.
And that one change from a sarcastic jerk to this flawed, loving, scared leader, that's what saved the movie.
It saved Pixar, and ultimately it saved Steve Jobs.
Okay, so the movie gets finished, it premieres, it gets those incredible reviews we talked about. It's a massive hit.
But for Jobs, the hit movie wasn't the end game. It was just step one.
Right. He and his new CFO, Lawrence Levy, had cooked up this secret 4-part plan. Step 1, make a hit movie. Check. Step 2, raise a ton of money, at least $75 million.
Which, given that awful Disney contract, was basically impossible. So they decided to do something incredibly risky.
They decided to take Pixar public with an IPO.
And the timing was just audacious. He scheduled the IPO for 1 week after the movie's premiere. He wanted to ride the wave of hype from the box office.
Just think about the pitch to Wall Street. You're asking them to invest in a company that has never, ever made a profit.
A company that was literally shut down just 2 years earlier because their movie was so bad.
And whose only real asset is locked into a contract where they only get like 5% of the profits.
The risk was off the charts.
Yeah.
And the big banks, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, they all passed. They thought it was too risky and refused to underwrite the deal.
But Jobs found a smaller firm that would do it, and his timing was perfect. The movie was a phenomenon. Everyone was talking about it.
So November 29th, 1995, the IPO happens.
The stock was priced at $22 a share, but as soon as the market opened, it exploded.
It closed the first day at $39 a share.
Yeah.
Nearly double.
Pixar raised $140 million, and Steve Jobs, who owned 80% of the company,
Became a billionaire overnight.
That's the moment, the comeback. There's that famous story of him calling up Larry Ellison and just saying,
"Hello, Larry."
I made it. But that $140 million wasn't just about getting rich. It was leverage.
It was everything. Because up until that point, Jobs needed Disney's money to make his movies. Disney controlled the cash, so they controlled him.
But with $140 million in the bank, Pixar could now finance their own movies. They didn't need Disney's money anymore.
And that completely changed the power dynamic.
So in 1997, Jobs goes back to Disney. But he's not the desperate guy from 1991. He's the billionaire owner of the hottest studio in the world. He has the power to just walk away.
And he forced them to tear up that old terrible contract.
The new deal was a true partnership. A 5-picture, 10-year deal with a 50-50 profit split.
He secured Pixar's future. But then comes the final perfect twist in the story.
In that exact same year, 1997, Apple, the company that fired him, is on the verge of bankruptcy.
They're dying. They desperately need a new operating system to save the company. And in a last-ditch move, they buy Steve's other failure, NXT, for $129 million.
And they weren't buying the failed NXT hardware, they were buying its advanced operating system.
Which would become the foundation for everything that came next at Apple.
Okay.
OS X, the iPod, the iPhone. All of it grew from the ashes of NXT.
And that purchase brought Steve Jobs right back home to the CEO's office.
The exile had returned, and the entire crazy 10-year journey, the near bankruptcy, the terrible deals, the creative collapse, it was all funded and made possible by the success of one movie.
All thanks to a cowboy and a spaceman.
So when you, our listener, sort of process this whole story, it's clear that Jobs' path back was just paved with failures.
He was exiled, his hardware vision failed, he signed that humiliating contract, his movie got shut down.
But his ultimate success wasn't just about having better technology. It was about his persistence, for sure. But it was really about that audacious financial move.
The IPO.
Yeah.
Using the artistic success of Lasseter's team at the perfect moment to create the financial power he needed, it was a brilliant move.
The whole story is just incredible.
Yeah.
The exiled tech genius finds his way back home because a bunch of animators had to figure out how to make a toy doll feel more insecure.
Which brings us to the final thought we want to leave you with. All the sources make it clear that the real key to saving Pixar, and by extension Steve Jobs, wasn't the technology. It was that painful creative rewrite. It was the realization that Woody had to be flawed and afraid, not a jerk.
Right.
So here's the question. If they hadn't had that Black Friday incident, if the movie had just been okay and released on time, would it have failed with audiences because the story had no heart? And if it had been a mediocre film, would Jobs have ever had the massive IPO success he needed to renegotiate with Disney and eventually return to Apple?
It seems like that total creative failure was actually the necessary ingredient for his ultimate victory. The shame was the setup for the triumph.
It makes you wonder, what failures in our own lives are just waiting for a radical rewrite to become our biggest success?